Alright, so here's a little video on playing the hi-hat. So the two things we're going to talk about in this video are, do we play the hi-hat with the tip of the drumstick, or do we play the hi-hat with the shank of the drumstick, if you will. Some people might call this the shoulder of the drumstick. So again, tip on the hi-hat, or shoulder or shank of the drumstick on the hi-hat. And generally the tip would end up being on top of the hi-hat, whereas the shoulder would end up being on the edge of the hi-hats, coming across the edge like that. So in that little groove I just played, I sort of demonstrated both of those methods with the same groove, and you can hear the sound difference. So know that you have those two choices when it comes to the hi-hat, and they do sound very different from each other, and to me they also feel very different from each other, and that's actually for me a little more important of a factor when it comes to deciding which method I'm going to use on the hi-hat. So to be honest, most of the time for me, I'm using the shoulder on the edge method because it feels better to me. The tip on the top, the hi-hats are they're very firm, and it's almost like hitting a tabletop. They're not forgiving at all. They don't have any give to them whatsoever. And when I play tip on top like that, it just feels like a little stiff, and at the same time like a little wishy-washy. Like I find it harder to control sort of the bounce of the stick. It maybe tends to wander around a little bit more, and on top of that, you know, to me a lot of times it's a little too thin sounding, whereas here I get a little more of a chunk sound, and it's got a little more meat to it. And so most of the time I'm shoulder on the edge. Now, a case where I basically always play with the tip is if it's like a jazz thing. Just technically, that's harder to pull off if I'm using shoulder on the edge, although I think I can do it. Yeah, it's way harder. It is possible, but you don't get quite the clarity that you do, especially with those two notes that are super close together. Not to mention that, you know, if we're talking a jazz context, usually we're hanging out over on the ride cymbal as well, and then we're already like tip action over there, and then if we move over here to just keep it tip action, I don't know, it makes it a little more efficient, I guess, although I suppose that happens in other music too. We'll be tip over here, but I'll go over here and I'll play shoulder on the edge, so I guess it doesn't matter that much. So are you playing the hi-hats with your thumb on top, like your thumb facing up? This is what we call French grip, and you're kind of using more of your fingers, or is the back of your hand facing up and the thumb's on the side, so more of an American grip, or possibly even a Germanish grip at times? So which one? For me, unless it's like that intricate jazzy kind of thing that's a busy sort of pattern, I'm always playing in an American style position here. For one thing, it allows me to bring my hand forward to allow clearance of the left stick if I need it. Whereas if I was going thumb on top, I mean, obviously I could still do it, but it feels weird, and it puts my wrist in this bent position, which is probably not very good for my wrist. So that's one reason why I do that. And then also, you know, I'm usually shoulder on the edge, and a lot of times I might need the volume, and so it's easier to get the volume with that as opposed to the French thing where you're relying on your little fingers for power. So that's a consideration. So what I'm trying to get at here is that there's things that you need to think about when you play the hi-hat. And I would recommend being able to make those decisions and sort of commit to something when you're playing. I do see a lot of drummers sometimes, they're just not aware of this, and they'll sort of aimlessly flip back and forth between the tip and the shoulder, and they'll change between, you know, French and American grip or whatever. And what happens is they end up with a really inconsistent hi-hat sound. And, you know, sometimes that might be what you want, but it should be a decision that you make, not something that comes out of ignorance to these ways of playing the hi-hat. Okay? So I will probably end up doing at least another video or two about the hi-hat because there's so much that goes on with this thing. But I wanted to do a quick one, like I said just now, just to point out those basic positions and grips and, you know, tip versus shoulder and things like that so you can get started. Okay, cool, groovy. See you next time.